11 and beyond. And I want to thank everyone for taking the time today to come and listen to all the speakers on the agenda today. And we have a very full agenda. And over the next few hours, we'll hear from consumers and family members, regional center directors, providers, and employees. We'll hear about the changes made to the community-based developmental centers and the challenges that lie ahead. In the latter part of the hearing, we'll catch up on the specific oversight issues contained in the Bureau of State Audits and the DDS audit of the Inland Regional Center. And we will conclude with public testimony. So at the end of the hearing, at about 4:30, I urge all of you to line up and give us your reaction in a minute or two. Welcome, Senator Emerson. We're just getting started. If we're not able to hear from everyone today who wants to speak, we will take written comments for the next week, and we'll post them on the committee's website. Last week, I and many other colleagues in the state legislature voted to make significant changes to the community-based developmental services system in order to help close our $26 billion deficit. Our current deficit comes on the heels of several difficult years where boom and bust cycles have played havoc with state revenues and have greatly challenged our ability to serve all populations, from better schools to safer communities, not just social services and health care. For years, we have been living in the worst economy since the Great Depression, and these indeed are very challenging times. In the developmental services arena, the budget reductions of the past year have totaled more than $500 million, including both state and federal funds. And our recent actions will reduce general fund spending by more than $500 million across the whole system. This comes at a time when the consumer population in the community is growing. So as we struggle to balance our commitment to public services with the constraints of our revenues, now more than ever, we must examine how we can be more cost-effective while still providing the vital support and services that consumers need to live in the community. We need to understand the role that accountability and transparency play in achieving this. Amid this fiscal crisis, we need to understand how to retain and sustain what people value most. And I do want to thank the members and the staff of the Senate Budget Subcommittee on Health and Human Services, and particularly its staff on the developmental services, for helping to reduce the amount of cuts to community services by $250 million from the original proposal. And I also want to thank the Director of DDS and her staff for continuing to look at ways to draw down more federal dollars. And as we go forward in this process, I encourage them all to keep doing all they can to keep reductions away from the direct services people need the most. And lastly, I want to highlight that this is a process. Much work remains to be done. Work groups must meet, public forums must be held, the department must draft language, and the legislature must review and may amend such language before any changes can be made to purchases of service. With other changes, the department must issue guidance and regulations, and the legislature must provide ongoing oversight on implementation. This hearing is just one component to ensuring we have ongoing public dialogue to help shape the changes in the developmental services system. With that, I invite Senator Emerson, if you'd like to make any opening remarks, and other than that, we'll start with the hearing.
Covered it. Let's just go ahead.
Thank you very much. Our first panel is the Lanterman Act, Past, Present, Future. Our first speaker is Michael Clark, Director of Kern Regional Center, followed by the team of Nicole Boslag and Kiara Hedlund. Mr. Clark, we'll start with you.
Senator Lowe.
You should press the red button. It's on. Press it again.
Is it on?
No, press it again.
No, there.
There. Okay, we'll try it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Senator Liu, members of the committee, Senator Emerson, and others who are here, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to share a few comments with you. I'm Michael Clark. I'm the Executive Director of Kern Regional Center, which serves people with developmental disabilities in Kern, Inyo, and Mono counties. Probably more importantly, I'm the father of Marnie Clark, my 28-year-old daughter, who happens to have Down syndrome and who has been a Regional Center client for all of her life. I've been asked to describe a bit of the history of our service system and the context around some of the issues to be addressed in your hearing and that are being addressed throughout the state today. Some of my comments will come from the point of view of a Regional Center director, and others will come from the heart of Marnie's dad, and I'll try to make that clear. Marnie was born on November 7th, 1982. My wife and I were feeling good about our new arrival, who happened to emerge into the world with a head full of bright red hair. Marnie was having some minor breathing issues, so as frequently the case, the doctor and other people took Marnie away, and they wanted to work on her a while. They sent us back to wait in a labor room. About 45 minutes later, the doctor who had delivered Marnie returned to our room and blurted out, "I don't know why God is punishing you. Your daughter is a mongoloid. We really are not certain that she will make it through the day, but if she does, if you don't feel up to taking her home, we can arrange to have her put into an institution." Needless to say, I won't use the word I would normally use on the street, but we were shocked. We were worried. We were concerned. Our hopes for our daughter were at least momentarily dashed. Prior to 1966 in California, and Marnie was born in California, if we would have turned to the government for help, we would have been told that the only help to be made available would be to place her in one of California's state hospitals. In 1965, those hospitals housed over 13,000 people with developmental disabilities and had a waiting list of over 3,000 people to get in. So I'm not sure whether that would have been a viable service alternative or not, had we even chosen to look at it. Through the late 1960s and early 1970s, California worked to develop a community-based alternative to institutionalization, a way of providing help, a way of providing services and supports to families such as ours and to people with developmental disabilities. The state enacted legislation which is now known as the Lanterman Act. The Lanterman Act has been implemented in the community through 21 private nonprofit corporations we call regional centers. The original Lanterman Act, which was known as Assembly Bill 225, the Lanterman Mental Retardation Services Act of 1969, pointed out that regional centers needed to be locally governed organizations responsive to and representative of the needs of the individuals residing in local service areas. AB 225 stated that the legislature finds that the services required of a regional center are of such a special and unique nature that they cannot be satisfactorily provided by state agencies. Went on to say a number of other very nice things. The Lanterman Act went on to specify who is eligible to receive regional center services. In a nutshell, the onset of the disability has to occur prior to the age of 18. It has to be expected to continue indefinitely, and it has to present a substantial disability. There is some more detail in my written testimony, but lots of the people in the room know those details, so I'm going to kind of skip through that in the sake of time. Once someone, and in addition, the person's disability must be attributable to mental retardation, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, autism, or a disabling condition closely related to mental retardation or requiring similar treatment. Once someone is determined to be eligible to receive services and supports, then the regional centers coordinate and, using purchase of service dollars, fund services and supports, including but not limited to, and there's quite a long list, but we work out individual plans with our clients. We call those plans IPPs, individual program plans, or IFSPs, individual family service plans. The IFSPs are for infants and toddlers up to the age 3, and then the IPPs are for people beyond the age of 3, all the way through the rest of their life. We develop a person-centered plan with the individual, with the family, with the circle of support, with whoever is appropriate to participate. And we identify services and supports that are really helpful to that person's disability and unique situation, and then we do our best to carry out, to implement, to provide the services that are necessary. The plan identifies services and supports to promote the individual's community integration, independence, productivity, and health and well-being. The plan must contain goals and objectives, the types and amounts of services and supports to be purchased, service start dates, and detailed information as required. The plan also identifies generic services, those services that are available to other people to be utilized in achieving objectives. The Regional Center works with the person and family to implement the plan and then to monitor the person's progress with respect to the plan. The plan then is revised as needed, or at least every 3 years, but for the majority of our clients, at least every year. Through this process, we work with people with a wide range of needs, and even though several individuals may have the same diagnosis, they can still have very different needs based upon their life situations. The IPP IFSP process truly allows for those varying needs to be addressed. They obviously can change across time, and changes need to be made with that. I see the IPP IFSP process as being the heart of our system. The existence of this process and the resources to implement the required services and supports are so fundamental to the promise of the Lanterman Act. In a word, the Lanterman Act gives people with developmental disabilities and their families hope as they look ahead. Back to my personal situation, we actually found out about Kern Regional Center at the hospital before taking Marnie home. As we found out more about the Lanterman Act and the promise that it holds out, we began to feel hopeful for our daughter's future. Last year, I was invited by the Korean Parent Network to participate in a speaking tour throughout South Korea, basically to tell stories like I'm sharing here. At that point, there was no funding available from the Korean national government to provide services or supports to adults with developmental disabilities. The leader of the Parent Network confided in me that before learning about the Lanterman Act and our service delivery system in California, he had always prayed that his son with autism would die the day before he did. Didn't know what could happen to his son. But after learning about what we are able to do in California, he said that he had hope that his son would survive him and have a meaningful life as an adult. Because I was the person who introduced him to the Lanterman Act and explained the California system, he asked me to, in essence, come and share the good news with a variety of politicians, parents, family members, and other interested groups in Korea. Their parent organization was so successful in raising public interest and support that for the first time this year, current year, the Korean national government has included some funding, about $44 million, for services and supports for adults with developmental disabilities in their budget. That's a small step compared to the need, but doing something is a major step. One provincial government has even gone so far that they're trying to write and adopt their own version of the Lanterman Act. Hope is powerful. The Lanterman Act provides so many people with hope, so many people and families with hope, that it would be a shame to do anything to detract from that hope. But we all know that there are problems to be addressed in California. We don't currently have ample resources to fund all of the promise made by the Lanterman Act. What we need to do is find ways to resolve the resource issues without taking away the hope and promise that so many of us rely upon. A few things that I would share that I think is worthy of consideration. In 1977, federal funds constituted 23% of the total allocation for intellectual and developmental disabilities community services in the United States. By 2006, that proportion had increased to 52% of the total U.S. community services spending. In California, federal funding represented a negligible amount of the developmental services budget in 1977-78, while today we have been able to grow the level of federal financial participation to 44% of the DDS budget. Federal dollars have become such an important part of our overall funding strategy, and DDS, the regional centers, the service providers in the community, families have all worked with us diligently over the last several years to enable us to increase our access to federal dollars. The Association of Regional Center Agencies has recently prepared a report dealing with federal funding and the role of the regional centers in the community system in acquiring that. And I would strongly recommend that report to your committee. It has got lots and lots of background information in it, and that it just provides an impressive array of data that shows we've come a long way since 1977. I think that with continuing vigilance and a lot of ongoing hard work, we can still do more in terms of bringing in federal dollars. But in order to do that at this point, I think the Department of Developmental Services, the regional centers, and community service providers all need to have the increased costs of doing business covered out of those additional federal monies. That we're all stretched very, very thin, and by covering the real costs of accessing more federal dollars, the state, the service delivery system, and most importantly of all, our service recipients will win. There's a lot of speculation going on, probably in this room, but throughout the community today on the development of statewide service standards or best practice guidelines. This could be a positive step for the system if it truly results in more uniform access to services and enhances quality within those services. On the other hand, if such development detracts from the IPP-IFSP process or simply presents a lowest common denominator approach to service delivery, it could certainly detract from the promise of the Lanterman Act. If we are going to have statewide service standards, or whatever name they will go by, I would strongly recommend that we need to have some version of self-determination or self-direction as an alternative model to service delivery. One of the major issues that we're facing is looking at the difference between helping people with developmental disabilities have their needs addressed versus being able to have all of their wants addressed. I certainly hope that the state will continue using a combination of state and federal dollars to address people's needs. On the other hand, maybe we in the community can find new ways of helping people address their wants without the use of government dollars. As an example, when last year's trailer bill language was passed, or excuse me, the 2009-10 trailer bill language was passed, a lot of social recreational kinds of programming were eliminated. And our clients like to have fun. They like to go out and do things. You know, all work and no play makes a dull jack, I think they say. So a group of us in Bakersfield got together and we started a Meet Your Neighbors campaign. The purpose of the campaign is to provide opportunities for people with disabilities and people without disabilities to provide or to participate in community events together. While there's an increasing awareness about the positives that people with disabilities can bring to community life, for us, the real goal is simply getting people together to have fun. With the help of lots of community organizations, in 2010, we were able to field an average of 2 events per month. And then in the month of October, we held an additional 18 months. October started off as 18 events. October started off as being our real focus. The events included attending sporting events, theatrical performances, concerts, movies in the park, etc. The cost was always low, like $2 or free for regional center clients. No state or federal dollars were used to support any of these activities. All the monies came from the community. Meet Your Neighbors has added a fun dimension back into the lives of hundreds of regional center clients and their families without the use of government dollars. And we're continuing to move forward, and this year's going to be bigger and better, and hopefully next year will be still bigger and better. If we can help people to realign their expectations so that their service needs are addressed by the service delivery system, but many of the wants are addressed by non-government funded community actions, that I think would have a positive impact on the budget, and it would not eliminate the promise or the hope of the Lanterman Act. More and more we see our clients working. Work is good. We all work, you know. Even though many of our clients require some level of support to maintain productive employment, the economics of employment do work. Almost all of our adult clients at the Regional Center are eligible to receive SSI, Supplemental Security Income monies. As their income increases, the SSI monies go down, but they still get more money. And as the SSI goes down, that saves the taxpayers' dollars. If the worker makes enough, ultimately our workers become taxpayers too. One last thing I would like to draw your attention to is the broad range of people that are served by regional centers. We serve many adults who live independently. Many of the adults we serve have very limited family involvement in their lives. Many adults do not participate in programs, rather they receive some level of support services. Some actually receive few, if any, funded services, but rely upon the regional center to provide a safety net and help them at times of transitions in their lives. Regional centers also work with many individuals whose lives have become intertwined with the courts and the criminal justice system. These individuals often are receiving court-ordered services through our case management and community services. All of these activities require someone to take the time to help, and that requires staff in order to do that. Regional centers have become the shared voice of many who have very few, if any, other people to speak for them or help them. In conclusion, the Lanterman Act holds out hope and promise for so many people in California. The regional centers and community service providers work consistently to bring that hope and promise into the lives of those we serve. We ask for your continuing support in helping us do our work.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. Let's proceed with Nicole and Kiara. I think she's on, yes.
Hi, my name is Kiara, and this is Nicole. We're members of the Consumer Action Committee of Alliance. We were asked here today to explain exactly what the Lanterman Act means to us and why it's important we don't destroy it.
But before we truly begin, I would like to point out that Kiara and I are both people with developmental disabilities who have a chance to live full lives of our choosing through the promise of the Lanterman Act. And although we are friends, we are very different people who have very different needs. In case you didn't notice, even though I can speak, I use a communication device so anyone can understand me like you use your voice.
Even though we both use wheelchairs and day program is a huge part of our lives, I choose to work and Nicole chooses to be out in the community. Even though we both traveled here in the same vehicle, the support we use to get there is very different.
Kiara only needs a little help getting ready. She lives in a family home and is able to drive to a program on her own. Unlike Kiara, I live on my own using supported living services to do the little things you take for granted, like getting up, going to the bathroom, and even the most basic things like eating and drinking. I also use paratransit services to get from place to place. You're probably getting the point by now that even though you may see two women with cerebral palsy who use wheelchairs, We are two completely different people with completely different lifestyles. There is no possible way our lives could fit into the same box. We are different in the same way, but we are all different from one another. And for us, the Lanterman Act and the IPP process is the key that opens the door to the lives we choose to live.
Nicole, what exactly does the Lanterman Act mean to us? How is it so important?
To me, the Lanterman Act is your promise to give me, and everyone like me, a chance at normal life, a quality life of my choosing, a life I want to keep living. For many of us, especially those with my level of physical need, the Lanterman Act is the key that locks the doors of the institution, letting us live in the community. Right now, you're considering putting limits on the services that I need to live, to simply live. By limiting the Lanterman Act, you are choosing to limit my life itself. What is worse is that you're lying to me and my fellow Californians by calling limits to our lives things like service standards and best practices. You're even holding work groups to decide how I live. Why wasn't I invited to any of these work groups? It feels like you're playing some sick game of poker with our very lives at stake. We should always have the first choice in how we live our lives.
Nicole, is it true that many of our lives have been affected by the choices that have been made here in Sacramento?
As you know, our community has been cut and cut and cut. Each wave of cuts has opened up larger and larger cracks in the system that supports us. After the huge budget cuts a few years back, the cracks finally got so big that people started falling through them, including myself. After the last wave of cuts, my wheelchair broke and I couldn't get it fixed. For me, and many people like me, my wheelchair is my life. With it, I am free. Without it, I am stuck in bed, a prisoner of my own body. Every time I tried to use it, I had to pay dearly. I was in terrible, terrible pain. I had to make a horrible choice between staying in bed all the time or being in terrible pain using a broken wheelchair to do really important stuff like grocery shopping, voting, and my day program. Most days the bed won, even though my home staff, my day program, and my regional center case manager went above and beyond every single day to help me navigate the system. The money for a new wheelchair just wasn't there. It took over 2 years, the loneliest 730 days of my life, laying prisoner in my bed, before I was able to get a wheelchair that fit my body. I became very depressed and shut down. For 2 long, horrible years I felt like I was half a person, like I was in hell. I'm a proud Californian that has never let my disability limit who I am, only add to it. But because of the decisions our elected politicians made in Sacramento and keep making, I had no life, no freedom, and no self-respect for over 2 years. None of us have chosen to be disabled. As Giara and I tried to explain earlier, disability is a strange thing. It is as unique from person to person as we are from one another. No one fits into the same little box. The promise of the Lanterman Act must be kept alive, as does the IPP process. If they die, I know many of us will die along with it.
Nicole, you hold a special place in my heart. You're like my sister, and seeing you in pain every day killed me. The thing I think that hurts me even more is knowing that your story isn't unique, that many people in our community of over 300,000 are experiencing stories similar to yours, but are not lucky enough to be here today. The Lanterman Act and its promise to serve us based on our individual needs must be protected. By protecting it, you protect our very lives. If the promise is broken, like Nicole, I am positive that many of us will pay the price of our lives.
Okay. Okay. Any questions from folks? No? Okay. Thank you very much from all of you. Appreciate that. Need some help. Our next panel, the individual program plan and purchase of service best practices. The panelists will include Catherine Blakemore from the Disability Rights California, followed by Rocio Smith from Area Board 5, followed by Steve Miller from Tierra del Sol Foundation, and Catherine McCoy from San Andreas Regional Centers. Please join us here at the table. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Ms. Blakemore, whenever you're ready. Just make sure the red light is on.
I'm on. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank you, all of you, for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. I, as Senator Liu noted, was from Disability Rights California, which is the agency mandated under federal law to protect and advocate for the rights of Californians with disabilities. I also want to thank each of you for the effort you have made so far to minimize the cuts to community services and ensure that there's a process in place with clear direction of the standards we're all working towards achieving, and most importantly, for ongoing oversight. We have a lot of challenges ahead as we attempt to define how we obtain a cut in services and minimize the impact on people like the two women you just heard from. It's quite a daunting challenge. I was asked to briefly describe what the trailer bill does and give our perspective on that. The trailer bill requires DDS to develop what are now called purchase of services best practices in collaboration with stakeholders. And it contains, the trailer bill language, very prescriptive words about what can and cannot be done, which I think are helpful. First of all decisions must be made through the IPP process. The standards must include exceptions. Families and consumers must get notice of those exceptions. The best practices may not endanger someone's health or safety or compromise federal funding, which obviously is important given Mr. Clark's remark about our reliance on federal funding. And then the standards go through and identify various things that may be looked at, such as eligibility and duration and efficacy of the services. The standards also must be consistent with the values of the Lanterman Act and with the entitlement. And I want to just spend a moment talking briefly about the entitlement and why that is so important. The state, as a result of the Lanterman Act, says that individuals with developmental disabilities should receive the services they need to live independent and productive lives, and it's the state's obligation to fund it. And even with the reductions in services that we've heard so much about, the entitlement remains. And I want to commend you for that wisdom, because in many states, absent an entitlement, there are long waiting lists for services where some people do not receive services for years. And so it is that entitlement that ensures that Californians with developmental disabilities receive the services they need. I also want to touch briefly on the word best practices. The initial proposal from the administration was about purchase of service standards, and it has changed as a result of the trailer bill language to be best practices. And I think that means something different, although others have suggested otherwise. Best practices mean generally accepted techniques, methods that have proven themselves over time to accomplish given tasks and demonstrate effective outcomes. When one thinks of the developmental disability system in California, you have to look at best practices historically. What Mr. Clark described in 1982 and going back into the 60s, is a notion that people with developmental disabilities should only be institutionalized, that people should be put away, should not be considered part of the community. But over that period of time, what we have come to learn is that best practices really reflect community integration with people with disabilities and their families making decisions as an integral part of that planning team. So the common meaning of best practices that we all need to use when developing the standards are that it cannot compromise an individual's right to receive services in the most integrated setting possible. People must be able to exercise meaningful choices about their living arrangement, their service providers, and their type of supports. And they need to obtain quality services in a manner that's consistent with their living preferences and priorities. The statutes are also clear that we cannot jeopardize any federal funding. And I want to just call your attention briefly to federal Medicaid requirements. I think very often we talk about federal waiver services as something that's just a funding mechanism. And it really, under federal law, is much more. It requires that services be provided to implement an individual's IPP, and it requires that services be provided to maintain someone's community. We also have what's called the EPSDT program, which is a Medicaid program, the Early Periodic Screening, Diagnosis, and Treatment program. And while it does not impose any direct obligations on DDS, the state Medicaid agency is obligated to ensure that services are available for individuals through age 21 that ameliorate the disability, even if it goes beyond the state plan services. Finally, I want to just mention briefly the Americans with Disabilities Act integration mandate. And I think there's a lot of talk about the ADA and the importance of ensuring people have access to services in the least restrictive environment. But the U.S. Department of Justice has recently, in a number of cases, put forth that a cut in services violates the ADA if it causes an individual to decline in health over time and eventually enter an institution to seek necessary care. Again, wisdom for us to consider as we're developing the standards. So just briefly, we would say the standards must reflect best practices as I discussed them. We must ensure that any decision implementing the best practices is made by the IPP team. We must have exceptions that allow services to be increased beyond any arbitrary cap. They must prevent out-of-home placement and institutionalization, and they must meet the extraordinary needs of the consumer. We have to ensure that the members of the IFSP and IPP teams discuss the applicable exceptions. Services must still be available in the most integrated setting, and families and consumers must receive notices of reductions and have the opportunity to appeal from them. And as Mr. Clark said, we must encourage the development of self-directed services. In closing, I want to just identify some key things that I think need to be noted when we're going through this process. We must use a transparent process. That's really what the two women were up here speaking about. We are talking about people's lives. We must involve people in decision making. The community needs to have the opportunity to look at the language before it comes final. We encourage DDS to share the specific language with members of the stakeholders group. Second, we must have sufficient time to implement any purchase of service best practices. One of the things that happened in 2009 due to the late passage of the budget was a lot of chaos as regional centers attempted to implement the new standards immediately. And while some regional centers did a commendable job of meeting an IPP and holding IPPs, others did not. And others did not give families notice, and others did not follow the standards. That is mitigated when we have time to roll this out in a way that makes sense so that families and consumers can fully have the opportunity to understand the new best practices and be able to fit those those better into their lives. And then third, there needs to continue to be careful legislative oversight, understanding what the implications of the policies are on individuals, a willingness and flexibility to adjust the standards if you hear information that they're not working. And it is because of your willingness to do that that I am more confident that we will end in a place that protects the values of the Lanterman Act and entitlement to services. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, Rocio Smith.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you, Senator Liu, Senator Emerson, senators. I feel very inadequate because I'm supposed to talk from the experience in the community, and you had two of my folks from my area come and speak before, but I will tell you what I can.
Sure.
As we try to reduce expenditures by developing best practices for purchase of services for people served through the regional center, we need to inform ourselves from the experience of previous budget actions. The purchase standards and other limitations enacted as part of the 09-10 budget have already had unanticipated consequences for people with developmental disabilities and their families. Although these actions included safeguards similar to those recently adopted in Budget Trailer Bill, they proved not to be sufficient for some. I will give you some examples that involve real people. Selena is a charming 12-year-old who has significant behavioral challenges. She attends a specialized non-public school where she does well, though she needs constant redirection. At the time that the new respite standards were enacted, her mother had been battling cancer, and the family was receiving exceptional amounts to assist them during those trying times. When the statewide standards came into place, the case manager informed the family that the respite would be reduced to the new statewide maximum of 30 hours per month. The family requested an exception based on Selena's needs and the mother's health. The regional center offered 40 hours per month, which was woefully inadequate, given Selena's need for constant redirection and the mother's compromised health. After much soul-searching, the family decided to file an appeal, and understanding that everyone needed to share in the burden of budget cuts, they asked for 60 hours of respite per month, what they thought was the bare minimum to keep their family together. The family prevailed at the fair hearing, and the judge ordered the 60 hours per month of respite. However, the anxiety and stress of fighting the system, the uncertainty of future family support services, and the fact that 60 hours per month respite proved to be inadequate prompted the family to make the heart-wrenching decision to place Selena out of home. It has been difficult for Selena, even though she's in a good home and her roommate is a friend from school. And it has been extremely painful for the parents, yet they feel that this was the only option left for them. We must realize that even when there are exceptions and safeguards, the price of going through due process may be too high for families who are already under incredible stress. In this case, the system did not achieve any savings by limiting respite available to the family. Just the opposite. The cost of out-of-home placement is much greater. Another example. Renee has a 20-month-old son who has been diagnosed with autism. Renee is a clinical psychologist, so she realized early on that something was amiss with her son Lito. And they received the diagnosis when he was only 14 months old. Early identification, we talk a lot about we want to identify kids early. Renee was referred to the regional center, where she was told that she should pursue her insurance for services. She has been extremely diligent in her pursuit of services paid for by her insurance, and Lito receives speech and occupational therapy this way. Here's the rub. Renee's insurance approves these therapies on a piecemeal basis. Lito may receive therapy once a week for a month, and then the insurance must process another approval, which has taken as much as 6 weeks. You see, insurance companies have no obligation to follow the recommendations of the individual family service plan. Renee has been in constant contact with the Department of Managed Healthcare, who has been helpful, but agrees there is nothing they can do to make insurance companies provide therapies in a timely, consistent manner. It is denial by delay. Renee has also experienced denial by delay from the Regional Center for Behavioral Intervention. Although Lito was identified early, it took 6 months of red tape and excuses to agree to provide the behavior intervention Lito needs to minimize the impact of autism and gain the skills so he will have a better future. Renee called me because she's pursuing behavior intervention through her insurance. That's what we want. She knows that if she gets insurance to pay for behavior intervention, the cost to the state will be much less. Yet her experience with speech and occupational therapy gives her pause. She's concerned that if the insurance company follows a similar pattern with this service, her son will miss out on the consistency that is critical for the success of behavior intervention. The battle that families must wage to get insurance companies to pay for behavior intervention is huge. Yet, in the end, they have no assurances that if they prevail, their children will get the services they need. Without assurances that the regional center will pick up services if and when the insurance does not, few families will take on this battle, and the state will continue to pick up the full cost of behavior intervention. When the requirement was put in place in Early Start that families must seek services from their insurance company before the child receives services from the regional center, there was no forethought about the impact of this decision, and so no system was in place to assist families through all the hurdles this entails. Catherine said it was too fast, too soon, too sudden. We must realize that families who seek services from Early Start are at a vulnerable point after having received an unexpected diagnosis that will change their lives. Further, early intervention is critical in the long term. Studies have shown that a more capable child will require fewer services in the future. Primary consumers, people with developmental disabilities, are anxious and stressed about the potential impact of service standards in their lives. You heard it from Kiara and Kim, a friend of theirs, who is actually in the audience, is a woman with cerebral palsy, and she expresses it best when she speaks about the impact of Medi-Cal cuts. Kim had an impacted molar, and because Medi-Cal no longer covers dental care for adults, and although the regional centers were given some funds to address dental care for their clients, no system was in place to assist her. She could not get a dentist to treat her and had to suffer a month of intense pain until her tooth became a medical emergency and she could get treated at the emergency room. Kim and her friends like Nicole and Kiara are on edge and fearful of the future because they have experienced the consequences of budget cuts. Like Kim says, when you cut, you hurt us. In every situation mentioned, the inability to plan thoroughly and understand unanticipated consequences has brought higher costs to the state and, in many situations, suffering to the people involved. The recent adopted budget trailer bill requires that best practices for purchase of services ensure consistency with the Lanterman Act values. That is, that services must promote independence, productivity, and inclusion in the community for people with developmental disabilities and support families to keep children at home. It also reaffirms the centrality of the individual program plan in making decisions. Rita lives with her adult son in Sonoma County. Her son has cerebral palsy and requires total care: feeding, bathing, dressing, toileting, positioning, everything. Rita has been taking care of him by herself for over 40 years with the supports and services she receives from the regional center and in-home support services. In order to be able to care for her son, Rita had to give up any dreams of a career, limiting herself to part-time work that allows her to be at home in the afternoon where her son gets back from day program. Rita uses the few respite hours she gets to be able to spend time with her grandchildren, who are the light of her life. While playing the game of Jenga with her grandkids, Rita realized that her life is like a Jenga tower. Many tiles have already been pulled out, but a few remain that, if you pull any of them away, her tower, her life will collapse. Rita told me that she needs the day program her son attends. It allows her to work. She needs the transportation that gets him to this program, picks him up on time, and she can get to her job on time. She needs the IHSS. The small additional income she gets through IHSS allows her and her son to make ends meet. If any of these tiles is pulled out through statewide standards or budget cuts, her life will come apart, and she does not feel she will be able to keep her son at home. The critical thing here is that each person, each family may have different needs. The authors of the Lanterman Act realized that it was the IPP realized that, and that is why the IPP is so central to it. We need to honor the commitment that California has made to individuals with developmental disabilities. To this commitment, we need to be firm. Our forefathers, and really a lot of foremothers, knew how critical it is to maintain a community system, a system which is based on using the private sector to provide the services and support so that people with developmental disabilities can be valued and valuable members of society. Rita's analogy to the game of Jenga is righteous. The service system for people with developmental disabilities is also like a Jenga tower. In the last few years, through a variety of cost containment actions, many tiles have been pulled, leaving the tower in a more and more precarious state every time. My fear, Renee's, Kim's, and Rita's fear is that without realizing some of the consequences of statewide standards or guidelines, this Jenga tower, which is the Lanterman Act, will collapse. It is up to all of us to be vigilant not to pull that weight-bearing tile for the system or for the individuals. In Selena's case, the weight-bearing tile, the respite the family needed, was pulled out, her tower collapsed, and the system is now paying much more in out-of-home placement. And to help you remember this, I put together a little show and tell, and each one of you will get a Jenga tower complete and falling apart, so you will remember that we have a precarious situation here, and lives of people are in play. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Smith. Mr. Miller, Tierra del Sol, welcome.
Good afternoon, Senator Liu, Senator Emerson, Senator Wright, and Senator DeSagne. My name is Steve Miller. I'm Executive Director of the Tierra del Sol Foundation. And first of all, I would like to thank you all very much, sincerely, for taking the time to learn more about this system. And I want to say that it's a system that invites, almost craves, a deeper look from members of the legislature. I think you'll find that the deeper you look, the more you'll see. And the more you see, the more you will appreciate how much has been done for the last 40 years. What an achievement the Lanterman Act has been, and and the pride that you should all have as members of the legislators and followers of the original authors of the Act, and Governor Reagan when he signed the full-fledged Act in 1971. Let me start by saying I was hired by a nonprofit organization, the Tierra del Sol Foundation, a community-based nonprofit organization, the Tierra del Sol Foundation, in 1990. You often hear the service provider community referred to as vendors or providers. I think it's important that you understand and appreciate that the services that are provided to Californians are provided by community-based nonprofit organizations for the most part, many of whom were started years before, decades before, the state of California determined that there should be a Lanterman Act and a coordinated network of community services for people with developmental disabilities. Places like Ability First, which was used to be called Crippled Children's Society, United Cerebral Palsy, Easter Seals, my own organization, were founded by parents who refused to accept the notion that institutionalization was the only avenue open for their sons and daughters. Organizations of parents founded community-based organizations and began raising money and creating their own self-help services. Over the years, California has come to rely on these community-based organizations as the backbone of the entire state's service system. As the parents that founded my organization in 1971 passed away, their sons and daughters are cared for. As the state institutions opened up, beginning initially, I would say, with the founding of the Lanterman Act in 1971, and men and women who did not have families came to organizations like Tierra and the other nonprofit organizations. We grew to become essentially that community-based system for all Californians with developmental disabilities. And we have partnered with the Regional Center, and we have partnered with the Department of Developmental Services. But first and foremost, we are organizations that are mission-driven. And so as we look at how our systems and our services have grown and matured since our beginning, we really haven't needed external accountability, I'll say. Because when the mom or dad of somebody that we serve walks through the halls of my organization, they're looking at the quality of the staff, and they're looking at the quality of the facilities, and they're looking at the kinds of interactions that take place moment by moment and day by day between my staff and the people that we serve. When we have our annual budget planning meetings and we recognize that the rates that we receive as reimbursement from the state do not begin to approximate our actual costs of services, our board has to decide whether we will reduce the quality of our services or we will, on our own initiative, raise additional funds so that we can keep the quality of services as high as it needs to be to meet our own standards. And so I think you'll find throughout the state of California, nonprofit organizations that the state depends on for care and services are out every day raising money, making donations themselves in the most part, and holding golf tournaments and every kind of fundraising event that you could imagine. Why? Because the level of care and the quality of care that people with developmental disabilities require exceeds the rate of reimbursement that we receive from the state. And yes, we are out every year and asking for consideration for more. But when we don't receive more, when we receive a cut, for the most part, we have not diminished the quality of services. We have doubled and redoubled our efforts to be the best that we can be. When I think about the IPP and how our systems have evolved, Mr. Clark described the IPP process as really one of hope, and I think that's true. But more importantly, I think it represents a power and a drive that has been behind all of the innovation and all of the improvements in our services for 40 years. When you sit in a meeting with a mom and a young adult and a regional center caseworker, and they say, yes, I understand the current service, but my daughter has more. It's true she can't speak, but if we could get a little bit of support to develop a nonverbal system of language, if we could get a little bit more help so she can go beyond the walls of our facility and perhaps take a class at a local community college, if we can find new ways to do new things, my daughter will go further with her life and accomplish more and perhaps become a tax-paying employed citizen. And it's the fact that the way that the Lanterman Act reads, that the regional center and the provider have to not only listen to that, but respond. And if it's a legitimate need, a legitimate request, then it's incumbent upon us to find a way to meet that need. And I would put it to you that every advance in our system since 1971 has been driven by that mom who said, yes, but. Or by that consumer who said, either with language or with their behavior, this is not working for me. I need something else. Not because I believe I'm privileged, but because my life matters. I am a human being. And I need a little help to express myself and to realize my potential. And so I honestly believe that without the IPP as a dynamic, as a power source and a drive, the institutions would still be full. They would still be full because we've learned that people with very severe behavior challenges and disorders are really in pain, in agony, because their legitimate human needs and wants are not met and they cannot express them. And by recognizing that each person, regardless of their disability, is a full human being and has the full range of needs, wants, and desires. And if we can find ways to match our services and our supports to that individual's unique personality and assets, they can build a life outside of an institution. They can build a life where they are contributing, supporting other people, adding their gifts to the community. And so we have seen the state of California move from an institutional system of care to one where initially programs like my own were essentially campuses and centers, to one where people said, I don't want to be on a campus, I don't want to be in a center, I want to be out and mingling and contributing to the larger community. And because of the drive and the importance of the IPP, my organization has had to respond and grow and develop means to support people in employment, to recognize the artistic talent of individuals and enable them to pursue their own economic empowerment through developing and selling their art. As we've realized over the last 10 years, 15 years, that youngsters should attend local schools and not segregated school sites. Adult service providers are recognizing that the future is going to have to change again, and that we're going to have to meet young people coming out of public schools expecting to have a full and rewarding and completely integrated lifestyle. And so our system is going to have to grow and change to support those kinds of lives. The drive behind all of this has been the power that individuals and families have had to drive our system forward. I'd like to just take a minute and talk about what I was actually asked to talk about, I suppose, which is the best practices approach. And as Catherine described best practices in a more in the commonly in the way that those terms are best understood. What I've seen so far in the work groups has no remote relationship to best practices. And I mean no disrespect to the administration of the Department of Developmental Services. What I see is an urgent search by responsible men and women to find caps, cuts, restrictions, and limitations to meet a budget target reduction of $174 million. When you talk about, or when you use the term best practices, that means it's a search for methods that are proven, objectively proven, to achieve certain outcomes, identified outcomes. So far, what I've witnessed in the work groups is a throwing on the wall, figuratively, of every possible idea that could save money. And I believe what we will now see is an effort to find a way to score those various ideas to come up to this targeted dollar amount. That is not best practices. And I think it's important that the legislature recognize that and take responsibility in a way. If your intent, if the necessity, I'll say, rather than the intent, if the necessity is to reduce services to people by a total of $174 million, then let's call it that. Let's recognize that this is going to hurt people. Let's recognize that if you write into the Lanterman Act specific caps, reductions, restrictions, you have changed the Lanterman Act. And my concern is that in the midst of a severe budget crisis, you will have changed the course and the nature of the Lanterman Act in a way that may end its value. I've worked in this system for 33 years now. I've heard stories from many, many parents, similar to what Mike Clark mentioned. This is a system that has worked. This is a system that has been accountable. From 1971, with over 14,000 people living in institutions, with an expected lifespan of under 40 years, with tens of thousands of people living in the shadows and margins, to 2011, where probably the vast majority of people with developmental disabilities are known to our community. And the state is not dotted with 19th century institutions, but rather you can't go outside any block and not find somebody working with a developmental disability. You can't find people with profound disabilities participating in preschools and integrated schools. They're out there. And this system has been successful in a dramatically cost-effective way. I would urge the legislature and this administration to recognize that it has not only been effective, it's been accountable. Improvements are necessary, and I believe they can be found. But let's hold on to the essence of this system, and let's recognize that we're asking serious sacrifices of people. But let's keep enough resilience in the system so that we can continue for the next 40 years.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I think Senator Wright had a brief question here.
I do. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I'm also old enough to have known Assemblyman Lanterman.
Yes.
I grew up in Los Angeles area, and I knew him.
Yes.
I actually agree with what you said, and I hope that the people in the developmentally disabled community don't think that any of us believe that what we're doing is something other than trying to balance a budget.
Right.
I have not found in almost 35 years that I've worked with regional centers and SACO and people who provide service in my community. I'm sure yes. Some of you know O.V. Smith and
Absolutely.
some of the old-timers who I grew up with.
Warriors.
But I'll tell you what's painful if you sit on this end. I'll give you another example, and I'll ask you what you would do. We had a bill years ago, for example, that provided services on a telephone and was based on the regular telephone network, and so much money went per subscriber to pay for the TDD and other services, the telephone. On a per capita basis, the number of people who still have a telephone is down almost 60 to 70% from what it was. Yes. So do I quadruple the rate that I charge to the rest of the customers, or do I now have to change the service because there are now more people with cell phones than landlines? And the federal government doesn't let me put the same tax on the cell phone that I could have on the landline. What do I do in that case? I'm not arguing that the TDD and other services weren't valuable, but now I no longer have access to the revenue to support what I needed to do to continue to pay for it.
If I had a good answer for that, I would probably be sitting up there. I don't. I understand what you're saying. The agony from our end as well is the lack of resources to do the job that you expect us to do. the lack of resources to do the job that the people sitting in the audience expect us to do. I think that Mr. Clark again was right. I think that there are, if we can survive long enough, we can build a more diverse community, and we can bring more people to the table who will help without expecting public reimbursement.
See, and I don't challenge. I mean, and I don't want to prolong the hearing. I don't question what you do. I remember in Los Angeles when people wouldn't let you put a group home in neighborhoods, and we had to amend federal law in order to say that so many people in a home was a family, and therefore by federal law that you could use it. The difficulty that I have now is that as I'm playing in a zero-sum game, again, I would go back to you. If there's something that I can do, if there's someone, again, I mean, people say, take the money from here, because that's ultimately what a zero-sum game is. I have no qualm about the services provided. And in fact, and Ms. Smith would beat me if I said otherwise, but I have no qualm or challenge about when you know her, so you know that's the truth. So I have no challenge for what you do. I just don't know in the environment that I'm in where I get the revenue to finance what I'd like to do.
I think in part, if I might just interject, it's in part requiring all of us to look at some different models of service, such as self-directed services, which is what Dr. Clark referred to earlier and I mentioned briefly, which is where we say to people, you have a budget, but you get more flexibility in how that budget's being spent. Dr. Clark was one of the regional centers that implemented that model, and it's really proven to be cost-effective. And so I was pleased to see that one of the requirements in the trailer bill was that the department look at that, and I think we need to really explore that as an option in a time of declining resources, where people individually have a budget that may be less than what's being spent on them now, but provided the flexibility to spend their money differently.
Let me just add one last thing, because as I'm thinking about it, you deserve a frank response, regardless of who wants to hear this or not. I think the system deserves a deep look at where money is spent. And in an era where it's not, I'll disagree, it's not a zero-sum game. It's a negative-sum game. And significant dollars are being taken out of the system. I think that the system is entitled, and the people that receive services and the taxpayers are entitled to a deep look at all of the administrative costs and where the money is really going. And if you have a responsibility as legislators, it is to keep that covenant between the taxpayers and the only people that really have an entitlement, and those are most of the people back here who need the services. And if you're not convinced that every penny that can be squeezed through this system down to directly affect the lives of people on a daily basis, then I think you should ask. Then I think it's incumbent upon you to find ways to move more of those precious resources through the bureaucracy and down to affect people on a daily, hourly basis. That has not been done. That has not been done yet, and I think that's what needs to be done.
Thank you very much. Last speaker, Ms. McCoy.
Thank you.
Make sure your light is on.
There we go. Okay. Senator Lieu and members of the Human Service Committee, I want to thank you for the opportunity on behalf of service coordinators to share some ideas. Those of us who work in the field... Okay. Those of us who work in the field of developmental disabilities in California have all experienced repercussions from the cuts and changes to the Lanterman Act in recent years. I suppose this is an inevitable sequence of events for a 40-year-old plus piece of legislation. No one can argue that the people with developmental disabilities in California can vastly live more independent lives in 2011 than they could in the early 70s. In the early 70s, caseload sizes for regional center service coordinators, or client program counselors, as they were sometimes called, averaged under 60 and the services and vendors regional centers could offer their individuals and their families were few. Now, service coordinator caseload sizes can reach over 100 in some regional centers, and service vendors can total into the hundreds and sometimes 1,000. So it stands to reason, given all this change, that the role of service coordinators and even the IPP itself may be due for a revise. I may restate some of the statements already made, but I'm going to do that anyway. I've served as a service coordinator for most of my 20-year association with regional centers. Because before I describe the ways we can rethink service coordination and PO best practice, I first want to talk about what service coordinators actually do. What is a service coordinator exactly? Well, first and foremost, service coordinators comprise, along with the person with developmental disabilities and anyone else he or she wants to invite, the basic IPP planning team. Service coordinators with the individual with developmental disabilities discuss, create, and plan meaningful goals and objectives for their future. Service coordinators at IPP meetings, they ask questions, they listen, which is the most important thing we can do, and they take notes and then create a unique individual program plan for the individual with developmental disabilities. The service coordinators, in effect, hold the heart of the system. They hold the heart of the hope for the service coordinators and that family or that developmentally disabled individual to work with. An IPP should address all of the needs of that individual, and it functions like a life map for the next 1 to 3 years, depending on the length of the IPP. The IPP meetings can be short and very simple, or I've been in some that have lasted hours and incorporate many layers of interpersonal complexity that result in equally varied services, depending on the needs of the consumer. The work of a service coordinator spans the length of an individual with developmental disabilities' life, which is unique across the public service system deliveries. Early on, a service coordinator helps to educate a family about what services might best meet their needs. And through this IPP process, service coordinators continue to educate families and caregivers from the time the child is born with a developmental disability, through his early start years, his preschool years, grade, and high school years. As you might imagine, some service coordinators have been able to carry the same case or caseload for many, many years, which allows them to know their consumers on a very deep and personal level. Because of this opportunity, service coordinators are sometimes accepted like almost family members for some individuals with developmental disabilities. Service coordinators discuss relationship issues, social skills concerns, and can offer other types of advice to individuals and their families. Service coordinators can provide consolation, referrals to outside counselors when families and individuals experience times of emotional distress or grief, relationship changes. Service coordinators can assist transition age individuals. Those are folks between the ages of 18 and 22. And their possible families to piece together a best future, whether it takes college classes with assistance, attend day programming, whether they want to learn vocational skills for future employment, work at a community job site, living skills, exploration, relationship building, family life skills, and even assist an individual with developmental disabilities to understand and embrace their sexual identity. Service coordinators connect with individuals with developmental disabilities and mental health conditions to community mental health treatment when needed. These services can be hard to find and hold on to because mental health services can't be accessed through funding for the Lanterman Act. Service coordinators also work with the criminal justice systems to make sure that involved consumers get the care they need and the justice they deserve. Service coordinators can also work with CPS, APS, and other systems, and can be involved in end-of-life decisions for some consumers. Above and beyond, we're advocates for all consumers across all diagnoses. Now, in terms of ideas for POS best practice and regional center change, I spoke with my colleagues at San Andreas Regional Center, and we came up with a nice grouping of, I hope you like these ideas. The first one of course, is to lower caseload sizes by possibly hiring more service coordinators. And this follows on the back of my co-panelists here, that this can save money by flattening administrative support, eliminating retired annuitants, and all other positions that are not service coordinator direct. Training for service coordinators are now not formally done, so some service coordinators have a deeper knowledge of regional center processes than others. Consequently, they provide more complex and complete information to families, write different IPPs that may be more complete, and provide more complete information across the life systems for the families and individuals. If we could train service coordinators consistently, that might be a helpful thing to provide efficient service. High caseloads, high turnover rates, and the lack of training and support create inconsistencies in service coordination that are delivered to consumers and families, and that also can create situations where you're spending more money than you need to. We want to support bills that require health insurance to pay for their fair share of the costs associated with treating and training developmentally disabled individuals. We want to support and create bills to bridge the developmentally disabled and mental health population consumers and their services. We'd also like to support self-determination and other types of new living situation, because what we're finding is the more choices they have, the better off they're going to be. And individuals with developmental disabilities deserve all the choices they can get. Another idea might be to make IPP formats very simple and identical across the state, and train service coordinators on the use and implementation. Some IPP formats, not the meetings themselves, but the formats might be able to use a drop-down box for basic services and allow space for clarifying comments. So if there's special case or special needs, those are also addressed. Another idea would be caseload specializations. Across some regional centers, there is that component, so that some units specialize in residential care or criminal justice or something of that nature. That way, it eases in training of caseload maintenance and of service coordinators, because everyone knows each other's caseloads pretty much and can do more or less the same type of work. Also, the use of technology is not very used at regional centers. Some video conferencing is used, but we're talking about with caseload sizes of 85 plus. Video conferencing for things like basic quarterlies, other regional center meetings, and when service coordinators are telecommuting would affect less travel costs, and also as in the same model as what we do now for psych med reviews. More telecommuting options for service coordinators, home-based offices, you have to rent out less office space in that case. And standardized caseload weighting to allow accurate restructuring of caseloads for best efficiency. Service coordinators, we don't mind if there's changes. Our concern is that we don't want regional centers to end up functioning like a DMV, where individuals with disabilities walk in, pick a number, and are served on the basis of what they can provide on a checklist. We'd love it if we can maintain the spirit of the Lanterman Act, the spirit of IPP meetings, and the spirit of service coordination. We understand they may need to change, but regional centers provide hope for individuals with developmental disabilities, and funding for this system needs to be available, and it needs to be vital. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any questions, Ms. Hancock?
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of times the criminal justice system or involvement with victims or whatever.
Right.
Could you just elaborate on that a little bit more?
Sure. Some of our consumers are involved in criminal situations. And in that case, regional center service coordinators can assist in court proceedings with lawyers, and to make sure that they understand this is a person with developmental disabilities with special needs, to make sure that they get the medications they need and possibly put in special places until they're ready to be released.
Do you ever deal with adults or young people who are coming out of prison or incarceration in some way and who need specialized services and someone to advocate for them if they're going to make it?
Yes, absolutely. That's something we do as well.
And is that a referral that you get from camps or prisons? Or how do those people come to you?
That's a good question. And occasionally it comes directly from the court systems. Sometimes it's a referral from the families, and sometimes the individual themselves might show up and say, I need services. Lots of different ways for those folks to get services, but other regional centers handle that population a little differently.
Yeah. Much more nurturing.
Just out of curiosity, there are about 300,000 folks in the developmentally disabled community. There are 21 regional centers. What's kind of the average number of, and all of these 300,000 folks have an IPP? Mm-hmm. And are they all assigned to a regional center given where they live? And is the re-looking at the IPP happen annually, every 3 years, whenever there feels that there's a need? How does that happen?
Senator Liu, it's all of the above.
Okay.
Depending on if the person lives by themselves or with the family, it's either every year. Sometimes they need to be seen quarterly or every 3 years.
Every 3 years, or as needed.
But it is always as needed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so everybody's plan is individualized, and then the regional centers contract with someone like Terra del Sol for services, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. Some things to think about. Thank you. The next panel deals with accountability, transparency, and beyond, and includes Jim Burton, who's the director of the Regional Center of the East Bay, Doug Pascover, and Nancy Chance, who are providers from Southern California and Northern California, respectively. And we've asked this group to provide commentary on the DDS trailer bill, particularly in the areas of accountability and transparency. And we've also asked them to talk to us about barriers to implementation. So let's begin with Mr. Burton, the director of the Regional Center of the East Bay.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Liu, members of the Senate Human Services Committee. A special hello to Senator Hancock, in whose district I provide services. My name is Jim Burton, Executive Director of Regional Center of the East Bay. Regional Center of the East Bay serves over 15,000 people with developmental disabilities and their families in Alameda and Contra Costa counties. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today on the topic of accountability, transparency, and beyond. Many of us were pleased to see the word beyond in that sentence, given the challenges we've been facing. To provide some background, I am completing my 35th year of service to people with developmental disabilities. For over 25 years, I worked at Golden Gate Regional Center, and primarily in the capacity as Chief Financial Officer. For the last 9.5 years, I've been proud to serve as the Executive Director at Regional Center of the East Bay. I'm also currently the chair of the Contract Negotiations Committee for the Association of Regional Center Agencies, responsible for negotiating the standard agreement contract for the 21 regional centers with the Department of Developmental Services. For my entire professional career, my first responsibility has always been to the individuals we're here to serve and to ensure that those services were provided with the utmost accountability and transparency. Accountability and transparency have always been a part of the Lanterman Developmental Services Act, which establishes the framework for community services for individuals with developmental disabilities in our state. The Act includes numerous provisions and requirements that address conflict of interest, fiscal and programmatic accountability and transparency, and access to information with protections for confidential consumer and family information. These provisions have served California well for many years and have been modified many times to improve, update the law as it relates to accountability and transparency. With the release of the August 2010 Bureau of State Audits report and the subsequent joint hearing of the committee and the Assembly Human Service Committee, it was clear that accountability and transparency in the community service system for people with developmental disabilities needed to be revamped and improved. The BSA report, titled A More Uniform and Transparent Procurement and Rate-Setting Process Would Improve the Cost-Effectiveness of Regional Centers, noted what was working, but also identified serious gaps in oversight, systems, and administrative processes in the community service system. The report also contained a number of important recommendations to address these gaps, including DDS provision of more, Department of Developmental Services provision of more oversight in rate setting for service providers, establishment of clear whistleblower policies and procedures at the Department of Developmental Services and at regional centers, development of a clear and open policy and process for the selection of service providers for needed services, requests for proposals, greater accountability and transparency in contracting for services. Given the content of the report, regional centers understood that we needed to take prompt and comprehensive action to address all of the BSA recommendations and reestablish confidence in the accountability and transparency of the community service system for people with developmental disabilities. To that end, the ARCA Contract Negotiating Committee, which I chair, immediately began working in collaboration with the Department of Developmental Services to establish new contractual requirements for all 21 regional centers. Within 60 days, working directly with Terry Delgadillo, Director of the Department of Developmental Services, we jointly developed contract language that required a board-approved whistleblower policy on a board-approved policy and procedure for the procurement of services. Both of these contractual requirements were included in our contracts on October 14th. Copies are attached to my testimony. And by January of 2011, all 21 regional centers have amended their board policies and practices to implement these important changes. In response to the remaining accountability and transparency issues raised by the BSA audit in this committee, the Department of Developmental Services proposed trailer bill language, which was modified and recently approved by both houses of the legislature. The trailer bill comprehensively addresses accountability and transparency issues in 5 overall areas, including establishing a cap on administrative costs for regional centers and certain service providers, establishing a legal framework for the recovery of funds from third-party payers, insurance companies primarily, increasing fiscal audit requirements for the Department of Developmental Services, regional centers, and service providers, expansion of conflict of interest requirements, processes, and enforcement of those requirements, establishing a transparency and public information policy, and expanding requirements for public posting of specified information. The trailer bill language is extensive, and the Department of Developmental Services projects savings and cost avoidance from this language to be nearly $191 million, over $191 million in total funds, $109.7 million in state general funds. Implementation of the trailer bill will improve accountability and transparency in the community service system and address issues raised by the Bureau of State Audits report. It will also present significant challenges for the Department of Developmental Services, for regional centers, and for service providers to meet the increased responsibilities with significantly reduced funding and staffing. With the remaining time that I have, I would like to provide some comments and recommendations on each of the 5 areas of the trailer bill that address accountability and transparency. With regard to the establishment of a cap on administrative costs, I believe it's important that we have a clear standard established to limit these costs. But it's also important to have a clear definition of what we mean by administrative costs so that the standards are fairly applied. I believe it would also be helpful to have a carefully defined exception process, requiring approval of the Department of Developmental Services to deal with documented, unique regional center and service provider situations, particularly those experienced by smaller service providers and regional centers that serve smaller populations in this state. The trailer bill language that establishes a legal framework to recover funds from third-party payers is another section of the trailer bill, is very important and has been needed for many years. This will significantly bolster efforts by the Department of Developmental Services and regional centers to collect when a third party is liable. I'm concerned, however, that staffing at the Department of Developmental Services and regional centers may not be sufficient to pursue these collections and will increase administrative costs that we are trying to contain in other sections of the trailer bill. Regarding the increased financial audit requirements, regional centers recognize the importance of good, independent financial audits in maintaining financial accountability. Regional centers can and will meet the new audit standards that prohibit using the same audit accounting firm more than 5 times in a 10-year period. I am, however, very concerned about the trailer bill audit requirements for service providers. While most large service providers already have annual independent audits, smaller providers may not. At a cost of thousands of dollars, smaller providers may well not have the wherewithal to pay for an independent fiscal review or audit. Certainly, many of the rates for service providers included no funding for this purpose, even before the reductions to provider payments were implemented over the past few years. Additionally, neither the Department of Developmental Services or regional centers have sufficient staff to properly review thousands of these audit reports and address all of the identified issues. Lastly, again, this will increase administrative costs for the Department of Developmental Services and for regional centers and service providers. Regarding the strengthening of conflict of interest provisions, we fully support these changes in law, recognize their importance, and believe they can be accomplished within existing resources. A number of regional centers have policies or procedures that already meet these more stringent trailer bill requirements. We are concerned about the cost avoidance savings projected by the department, however, which is over $20 million, $11 million in state general fund just for this particular item. Lastly, the trailer bill contains requirements to improve transparency and oversight and to prevent inappropriate contracting and billing. These requirements will also greatly expand the public posting of numerous reports and information on regional center websites. Again, we fully support these changes, recognize their importance, and believe they can be accomplished within existing resources. In conclusion, I believe the regional centers, the Department of Developmental Services, and service providers all understand the critical importance of this trailer bill in maintaining the trust and confidence of those we serve, the legislature, and our extended community. I assure you we will do our utmost to implement the spirit and letter of these changes in law. I am concerned about the sizable savings that are projected to occur as a result of these sections of the trailer bill, but also recognize the significant difficulties in estimating cost avoidance and savings. I'm further concerned that these changes could divert efforts from serving people to other administrative tasks. And honestly, that's my biggest concern, as I know it is this committee's. We recognize the importance of accountability and transparency. It is crucial. But we also, and you heard from a number of folks earlier about the very critical issues that we deal with every day and the importance of serving people and serving people well. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you on this issue. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Let's question.
I was very taken with your point about smaller providers and having difficulty complying with the internal fiscal review or audit. And I'm wondering what you would propose to deal with that.
I think we might need to look at the limit The threshold limit is $250,000 a year in revenue. I recognize every dollar of that is important taxpayer funds, but it could cost thousands of dollars. We've had estimates of $7,000 to $8,000 to have those reviews done. And again, these are providers who are truly struggling to keep the doors open and continue to provide services. They simply don't have those funds. So perhaps a higher threshold, and maybe we could look at some of the national standards that exist in terms of the requirements for financial.
Do you think it would work to have a streamlined, shorter form, but also some kind of evaluation for outcomes? Because I think our, outcomes are the most important thing.
Absolutely. Yes, and there are provisions in the trailer bill, not for a full financial audit, a CPA audit, but for a financial report. I think it's just important that we clarify what's included in that financial report, because that will determine the cost of that report going forward. But very important point, yes.
Thank you, Senator Hancock. I, too, just, in our effort to I guess, contain costs. The concern to us is what you've identified is that, while we're trying to do more transparency, more accountability, it is adding to administrative costs as opposed to having services for people, and that's our choice. I mean, that's our goal, is to service people. And so, I don't know whether what that balance is, but it is a little out of balance, perhaps, and maybe we have to be more creative in terms of this accountability, transparency deal. But anyway, let's go forward with Doug Pascover and Nancy Chance. Doug.
Thank you, Senators, for the opportunity to provide feedback and be nervous. My name is Doug Pascover, as you said. I'm the Executive Director of Arriba. We're an independent living services agency headquartered in Altadena, the jewel of Senator Liu's district. I wanted to Jim talked about a lot of what I wanted to say, but I wanted to also get into a few details that I think shouldn't be missed. As he said, it is already a practice for the regional centers to come in and do a fiscal audit for the agencies. So when the department is projecting savings, it's assuming that the independent auditor won't find things that an interested party found. This, as this trailer bill budget is written, I expect it to cost about 1.5% to 2% of our annual budget to comply with this, and that after the last 3 years of cuts, in which we have lost about 35% of our income and 3/5 of our administrative staff, is enough that we won't survive it. And part of my frustration in accepting that is that it's hard for me to believe that very many savings are going to be accomplished when we're creating $10 million in an unfunded mandate. It's hard to imagine how $10 million in savings will be achieved. There's also a very specific way that this is, Senator Liu, you pointed out that this is adding administrative costs. There are administrative costs that I think we all want providers to have and to incur. Our administrative overhead includes making sure the documents that these auditors will look at are true. It involves quality assurance, training, staff discipline, and a lot of things that are very important. And when you reduce the resources we have available for administration, either directly or indirectly, and at the same time create a significant new administrative piece, which is purely paperwork, there's a particular effect on our ability to be out in the field, like I said, verifying the very things that the auditor is going to check. And I think the same thing is going to happen at the regional center, where there are cuts scored to their administrative related to this, and yet there's this new unfunded requirement that they're going to read all of these audits. So they, too, are going to have to take some of the people who verify the work that we do and now have them reading the new paperwork that's been created. So it very much feels like a step in the wrong direction and one unlikely to achieve savings. I was encouraged to say something positive about the accountability language. One thing I'd like to say is that I agree and have felt for a long time that accountability, especially for outcomes, would improve this system a great deal and is not less than the taxpayers can expect. The requirement that the executive directors be clear a criminal background check is obviously a positive thing. I am not allowed to hire people who wouldn't pass the background check, so I didn't even realize that I didn't have to. But yeah, I know. It could have really changed the character of what we're thinking while we're sitting here, if we'd known. But I do think, particularly with the smaller providers, and our agency is not far in excess of the threshold Jim was talking about. I mentioned our funding has been reduced by 35% over the last few years, and we are reaching the point, and we are now down to 2 administrative staff, and we are reaching the point where the costs of being a standalone agency are more than our ability to pay. With this requirement, I'm certain that we will be, and in the document, in the background, you mentioned that the hearing is intended to provide a forum to discuss effective implementation of cost reduction. One area that hasn't been looked at is consolidation. I think that in this new system that we've developed, there probably are more agencies than the system can support, and one of the major obstacles to our consolidating is that the vendorization which we are given and to which clients that we serve are assigned vanishes if there's any change of ownership. So under current law, if my agency goes bank, we happen to be the low-cost provider of ILS in our area. When our agency either goes bankrupt or if it were taken over by another agency, under current law, all those clients are separated from all the staff who will all lose their jobs. The clients will eventually be reassigned to other agencies, and the staff will have to look for jobs, but those relationships are broken. The state will be paying between 10 and 35% more for the same services that we're now providing. And if that vendorization were transferable in the merger or sale of an agency, it would make it possible to reduce maybe the least important people in the company while keeping those jobs and those critical relationships and the current rate structure intact through the transition. So I hope you will consider that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Chance?
Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Chance. I'm a partner of California Disability Community Action Network, and I'm the Executive Director of Training Towards Self-Reliance, which is a nonprofit agency that provides independent living services here in the Alta California Regional Center as well as in Far Northern Regional Center. And TTSR also has the distinction of being one of the first agencies in California to provide independent living services to people people with developmental disabilities, starting as a pilot project way back in 1977. And I'm telling you this because I think it's important to know that this program has been here and been strong for many, many years, but currently is on the brink of no longer existing due to the ongoing cuts that we've survived, that we've dealt with for the last 10 years, really. And before I address the things I was asked to address in terms of accountability and transparency, I think it's really important that you understand what we have survived and what we've had to do, we've dealt with over the last 10 years. Provider rates were frozen in 2003. In 2009, we took a 3% rate cut. In 2010, in June, we took an additional 1.25% rate cut. We have all of that happening at the same time that the cost of doing business continues to increase. And when I say cost of doing business, I'm talking about things that I think are really important, like providing health care to the staff that work for us. Healthcare continues to just skyrocket, and in my agency, I've just recently had to reduce the benefits to people that we serve. We've had to have across-the-board pay cuts, and I've laid off 10 people in the last 14 months. So things are dire, and I think before we move forward, I think it's important that you know about what we've come through. Things that were put into trailer bill language last year that will affect us, that we have no control over. Things like the least costly provider category, but providers don't have a choice about lowering their rates. It's, so if you have a higher rate, too bad for you, that kind of thing. So I guess why I'm telling you this is I think there's a lot of unintended consequences to things, to trailer bill language, and I think as we go forward, it's important to know those things. I'm going to pretty much repeat what everybody else has said, I guess. I have a huge concern about the annual CPA audit. Although I have it maybe a little more of a different concern, I don't think the audit is the tool to get the information that the state wants to get. A CPA audit just says that I am fairly representing my books. If you're concerned, or if the state is concerned about whether people are billing correctly or, overbilling or any of that you're not going to get that information in a CPA audit. And so I have real concerns about that. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be some accountability. I think absolutely there should, but I don't think this is the correct tool at all. So I think what's going to happen is people are going to be required to spend between $7,000 and $10,000 that they don't have to send to a regional center who doesn't have the staff to go through the thousands and thousands and thousands of audits that they're going to get. And I'm not sure that the information that you want to receive is there. So that's a concern for me. And I also have the concern about people, vendors that are smaller. I think this is not a one-size-fits-all system. It's a very complicated system, and when you put language together that addresses things like even the 15% administrative costs, that might be fine for an agency that's large and has its administrative costs spread across, but what about the agency that it provides housing, that helps people get affordable housing that has 2 staff, an executive director and a receptionist? Well, I think that falls into administrative duties, as well as the other stuff. I think that if we're going to have this kind of language, it has to be more well thought out. I think there has to be more information. I think there has to be categories. And so I think that's really important. The other thing I think about issues of accountability is I think that it's important that I really like the idea of regional centers regional centers posting their policies, especially the purchase of service standards, online. But I think you should take it a step further than that. I think that if people are, I think that you need to be real clear that the policies are very very clear and not just kind of some little, I don't know, paragraph, but the actual policy. And then the other thing is I think that if you're going to change a policy, so let's say that for a regional center to save money decides that people that get independent living services after 2 years can only get it for 15 hours a month. Well, then I think they should have to send out a letter to every independent living service provider to tell them that that change has taken place. And I think it should be posted on the website. I think accountability and transparency for those, that's a much better way of making sure that things are operating in the way that they should. Anyway, the rest has pretty much been said, and I don't want to take up your time with repeating myself. But I do think it's important to remember that vendors are struggling and strapped. And, and the other part I want you to remember is that we employ people that make very little money, but that do this job because it's an important job. I've been working in the field of developmental disabilities my entire adult life. I didn't choose it as a career to get rich. I chose it because it's important work, and it's something I could be proud of. But for the first time in 30 years, I'm getting pretty disillusioned. And I feel like I'm watching one of the most important laws California's ever created be dismantled. And I'm embarrassed that the state of California has decided that the rights of people with disabilities are no longer a priority. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Applause. Tell me, both you, Jim, you did give some suggestions, and Doug and Nancy, you painted a very bleak picture for your agencies, and if you had to go through this, what the state is asking you to do in terms of accountability and transparency. You gave some illustration, Nancy, about how to measure effectiveness in another way rather than just doing the paper counting or if the dollar bills are appearing in the right columns or something like that. Is there, in the regional centers, have you thought about different kinds of or models of accountability as opposed to just a financial audit? Indeed, if they don't measure exactly the outcomes that we're supposed to be getting.
We haven't had the trailer bill language very long, but I think in terms of the financial reports that are required and the thresholds, I think we could work on those to at least make sure that they address the issues that are of highest concern and minimize the billings that are going to occur in this case. So those would probably be the two areas that I would look at. The threshold for when you require fiscal monitoring, and then a very clear statement of what we're expecting from that fiscal monitoring.
In terms of outcomes.
Yes.
Okay. Any other senator would like a comment? All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Something more to think about. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our last panel for the afternoon is audit updates, and we have Terry Delgadillo and Elaine Howell and Carol Fitzgibbons, and Vicki Smith. And so Ms. Delgadillo is the Director of Department of Developmental Services. You have a bad cough. Elaine Howell is the State Auditor. And Carol Fitzgibbons is the Director of the Inland Regional Center. And Vicki Smith, you are a Director of Area Board 12. Okay. Let's begin with the Director.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. And first, let me apologize. I do have bronchitis, so I'll try not to cough too much or too loudly. And if I do, I'll ask our Chief Deputy to come up and finish the testimony. I really appreciate you holding the hearing today, and I just want to say, first of all, you had before you today people that have been in our system for 30-plus years. These are the experts, the wise people that have seen everything that our system has gone through, and we're fortunate that the majority of them have agreed to help us with this very difficult time. I don't think anybody in this room wants to be where we are. I can speak for the department. The department does not want to be facing these kinds of cuts, and I don't think the state of California wants to be facing them. Unfortunately, the state of California's budget situation doesn't give us an alternative at this point. So I am really pleased that you're holding the hearing and that you've heard from people throughout the state and that they are offering ideas. I took notes today of things that came up, and we'll work with the work groups to get input and feedback on those ideas to try to move things forward. Today, the committee asked me to address two issues. First of all, to give you an update on the Bureau of State Audit's report and the status of the department's activities to date. I won't go into detail on every single item because when we met in November, we did have that discussion, and I'll be happy to answer questions if we've not addressed the concerns. The first issue is that the Bureau of State Audits did identify oversight and accountability issues related to the regional center system. They had recommended that the department expand their scope of their audits that we do, which we have done, and we are implementing those protocol changes. I think it's important to note we've got about 64,000 providers in the state, of which about 34,000 of them are actually business-type providers. Many of them are family members or relatives. And the department has 8 auditors to audit 64,000 providers, to give you a sense of things, and 9 auditors to audit the regional centers, which are required to be done every year. We have also, as Mr. Burton mentioned, we immediately entered into contract negotiations with the regional centers, and we have contract language requiring each regional center to have a procurement policy, have the board approve the policy, have the policy posted on their web. All regional centers